Oh, Shift! You're listening to the O Shift podcast.
They just announced it. Instant checkout available today. OpenAI is definitely going in that direction. OpenAI can actually deliver that in a way that's meaningful conceptually because it has memory about you as a user. There's no reason I can't create an entire storefront from a prompt interface. That's an orders of magnitude cheaper approach to doing this work.
Welcome to the O Shift podcast, where AI meets software as a service. I'm Rick Watson, and this series explores how software companies are evolving in an AI-first world without rewriting everything they've already done for the past 5, 10, 15, sometimes years. And so these are real stories of transformation and resistance, practical adoption. Today, I'm joined by Bryan House, the Chief Executive Officer at Elastic Path. Bryan is the head of the company, and his platform is intentionally agnostic to the front end. And so this is really a perfect vantage point in this kind of AI universe and the debate that we'll talk about, which is kind of termed the death of the storefront. AI native shopping. What does MCP or model context protocol? You've heard us talk about that here. What does that mean for the next generation of what headless looks like? Bryan is looking at changes across shoppers, merchandisers, and developers. And so excited to start with kind of the big claim you have, Bryan. First of all, welcome to the show. And the storefront is changing. Let's start there.
Sure. Rick, great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's really interesting what's happening at this moment in commerce at a time where, if last few years it felt everything in commerce was pretty homogenous, your ability to differentiate was challenging. Now AI is sort of upsetting all of that. And I think, I just published an article on LinkedIn recently, the $67 billion commerce opportunity hiding in plain sight. And really that was about, based on the data that OpenAI shared about how people are using, OpenAI sort of, what tasks they're doing. And, there's some fascinating things just given the scale of what OpenAI is doing. When 10% of the world's population is using your platform, everything you do is large. And right. So, they're getting 2.6 billion messages a day, of which 2%, but still 55 million messages were around searching for products to purchase. Right. And so it really, highlights the fact that, when you sort of aggregate an audience of that scale, the question becomes, how do you monetize that, right? And they've got a great revenue stream from subscriptions, but given their valuations, there are things they need to build on that, right? And so it's been pretty clear to me for a while, and they just announced this week that they are going to add checkout. And part of this is, where is the money in commerce? At the end of the day, the commerce, B2C e-commerce, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, is a $5 trillion market. But nobody plays at the $5 trillion market level except for Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, the payment providers, right? And so if you're ChatGPT and an OpenAI, and you think of, where are $50 billion revenue opportunities for us, in commerce, that's the biggest one. And so I think it's been clear for a while that given the volume of people searching on this, the place to do is monetize the transaction rather than monetize ads to drive to a transaction the way Google has for years. And so they just announced it, instant checkout available today. Right. And what's interesting there is Shopify in the commerce world and Toast in the world of restaurant POS has already proven this model exists, right? We'll give you software, we'll give you hardware. We just want the payments piece. And so, OpenAI is definitely going in that direction, and I think will continue to get bigger. And, I think I calculated just on sort of traditional open, payment take rates. Like today, that's a $3 billion opportunity without doing nothing, just putting taking your credit card that's already in there and using it to process a transaction. Give you some very, very conservative growth estimates on OpenAI. This is a $70 billion opportunity for them. They'd be crazy not to take it. And so what it means for, whether you're a retailer, B2C or B2B is now, what does that mean when now OpenAI is a new channel for you to find shoppers, to find buyers, right? And so, what does that mean for your product catalog? How do you deliver information into those? And what's the relative value of your storefront when, the significant portion over the last 5 years of your sales have gone to Amazon and Walmart. Now that same pattern is going to exist again. They're going to go to OpenAI and Perplexity and others. What's the value of a storefront in that? Is it just for brand? Is it for content? I think it's an open question to be answered.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like the areas we're talking about here, you mentioned the large number of subscribers for OpenAI, as opposed to Google, which, I mean, does have a payment relationship with a lot of people through Google Play and Google Ads and et cetera, but it's a little bit different. It seems to me that it could be almost easier for OpenAI than Google to develop some kind of ChatGPT Prime if they wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting and unique about this is that, is ChatGPT explicitly remembers things about you and remembers your conversations. And so, one of the I'm trying to figure what the analogy is. One of the goals of commerce, and this happens all the time too, when you talk to analysts, is personalization. And, the challenge, of course, is very few branded commerce sites get enough traffic to drive personalization, right? So like, it's sort of this Sisyphusian task. I did all this technology to drive personalization and I don't have enough traffic to actually make it work. It's because you're not TikTok. It's crazy, but OpenAI can actually deliver that in a way that's meaningful conceptually because it has memory about you as a user. And it makes way more sense because, one of the things we've heard a lot in sort of the AI and commerce world is everyone's going to have personal agents that, remembers all the things you bought and then, will shop for you. But imagine you're a website operator or store operator. Now suddenly you have to filter through millions of agents to figure which one's the good one and which one's the bad one. Like that's an impossible task. Whereas if you just know OpenAI is a good agent and you authenticate those, then you'll be fine, right? And they'll do the searching on behalf. So I think that makes way more sense in terms of solving that problem of remembering what your preferences are, what your sizes are, what the things, the types of sort of aesthetic decisions you make, and then facilitating a transaction.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about facilitating transactions. I mean, obviously, Elastic Path is building tools for merchants to succeed in this new world we're entering. We were chatting about some of the principles that you have to guide your development, and you really centered on kind of like 2 principles. So can you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we very much are believers in sort of having guiding principles and being explicit about them because they create sort of a decision framework for you to use when you have trade-off discussions. And so as we thought about it from an AI point of view, it's really 2. The first is exposing data everywhere we can to make to our customers to make it actionable, right? One of the things that's interesting in a commerce platform is you have all this data, customer data, order data, site traffic data, product data, promotion data. How do you make that actionable? And so much of it gets trapped out in the commerce system. Then you need BI tools to do it. And so part of the things that we're excited about is AI as a potential to sort of democratize that sort of interaction with the data, right? You don't need to be a specialist or write SQL queries to get the right information out. And so we're sort of building data warehouse capabilities that you can query for anything, whether to understand how your store is doing. So that's really important. And then the second is we want to create new solutions to solve existing deficiencies, right? So, one of the things that we've heard a lot, like in B2B use cases, is the sort of challenge of Salesforce adoption, for buying portals and quotations, and right, those things are too much friction. And so it's easy to stay with sort of status quo processes. Like that's a great place to use AI to eliminate that friction, simplify workflows, and give salespeople a sort of a superpower, if you will, to better serve their customers, right? So this has definitely been a big thing for us, is how and we've seen the benefits of it is as we really aggressively adopted AI inside the organization. Things that would in past conversations a few years ago say like, oh, that's going to take us 3-4 quarters to build. Now we're building in a quarter, because we've accelerated that process by using AI sort of alongside what we traditional development processes, whether that be rapid prototyping and testing out ideas, whether that be sort of using AI to generate code or improve testing of code that you've written. But it really has become sort of an accelerant for our development organizations in terms of how we attack problems. And, honestly, it's given us this ability to maybe take on things that in the past we've been sort of reluctant to do, because you constantly ask yourself, is this our core competency or not? But now, given that the level of effort required to deliver it is a lot lower, then is there a business justification to do it?
Yeah. And so it's creating, I think, new opportunities, and, all the new technology coming out of Anthropic, which I have to say, I mean, for as long as it took the world to settle on like REST and SOAP and like, the whole journey, EJB, like the last like 30 years of interconnectivity, what Anthropic has done with MCP in the last 5-6 months has been pretty breathtaking. Can you talk a little bit how you see that changing how software is generally made, and in particular, how are you thinking about it for the set of products that you expose?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in terms of the pace of adoption of this thing, right? And it's what's interesting is we also recognize the need that there was sort of a gap in utilizing AI in products, and so it so elegantly filled that gap and just sort of turned everyone on. There's two things that we've been thinking about. One is we have a suite of APIs that you can use, or a mock architecture, to build commerce applications, and they all adhere to the Open API spec, so they're all well defined and what have you. But still, it takes a developer time to grok all those and understand how all the pieces fit together. And so we made a conscious decision after a discussion is we should put an MCP layer all over all of our services, because you can use tools and resources to figure out how to best combine these things, right? An order has multiple API calls, right? It can sort of help sort of put all those pieces together for you. And then we started building to our own MCP layer across all of our services to, in some ways dog food our own capabilities and understand what works well and what doesn't work well. And so that has proven really valuable. And it's, part of this is creating the unlock in people's thinking in terms of, I hadn't thought about doing this or doing that, and sort of making progress. And a good example of this is I mentioned the data warehouse before. We were going down the path of building an analytics solution that had your typical filter scroll user interface, like pick a thing, set your filter, scroll. And I was like, wait a minute. On this other side, we have this data warehouse. Why don't we just apply a prompt interface on top of this, query our MCP services, and generate the data we want? And then let's do ask and discover, as opposed to, building a rigid sort of hard coded dashboard, right? And everyone's like, oh yeah, that is a good point, right? It's just a matter of sort of, of thinking out of the box a little bit. So
I think so many of these AI solutions, if you think in traditional ways and aren't necessarily, you almost need to prototype and fail and like go back to first principles a little bit. Okay, we have new tools in the toolbox now that we didn't have before.
That's right. Well, it's like, I mean, I've worked at startups my whole career. I can't tell you how many times we've built a thing and then, we're getting to release 2 and everyone's like, you know what? We built this wrong. Can we go start over and go, and in the old days, you couldn's do that. You're like, we don't have time for that. In sort of this sort of AI prototyping world, that's exactly what we do. Right. And and there is very little expectation that you're going to implement the prototype, but the prototype answer is such a better, more high fidelity communication tool, particularly between product management and engineering, between product management and customers to get feedback, that it eliminates that, the first time we write it, we're going to just effectively throw away code and then we'll write it better the second time. That whole process, those classic every startup I've ever
build one to throw away, you will anyway, kind of that.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. If you don't know the problem space well enough to have confidence to attack it.
Exactly.
And then
I would love to get your thoughts on, like, from a jobs to be done point of view, just to recap for the audience, MCP. Like, we know what an API is. It helps you. It's sort of your verbs and you're retrieving nouns and updating them. And what is MCP in terms of a job to be done point of view with regards to the different actors out there?
I think a good example for us, and this goes a little back to what we were talking about from storefronts, is there's no reason I can't create an entire storefront from a prompt interface, because the patterns are well understood. We provide sort of building blocks in terms of a Next.js application, sort of a reference architecture. But I need to populate it with products. I need to organize those products into categories. And so we are currently working on a set of developer tools to essentially do exactly that, is to, I want to build a storefront. It has these sort of capabilities. It has these things. I'm going to put these products in it. I want you to organize that. And all of that is happening via prompt. That's a good example of accelerating a cumbersome process. Like, anyone who's familiar with e-commerce knows that front-end storefront design is probably 50% of your project budget. Now, if I can just do all that at prompt and have a Next.js app that it just needs a style, that's a, orders of magnitude cheaper approach to doing this work. And it focuses the developer on the refinements and value add, not on sort of the building blocks, if you will. So I think that's a good example of how to put an MCP to work, if you will.
Makes sense. And you mentioned about the process of sort of dog fooding your own MCP layer. I think there are be a lot of people interested in that, because there is discussion about, clearly there are a lot of companies that have released their own MCP server, but the idea of not building to your APIs anymore, building to your MCP, is something I hadn't heard a lot about. So I wanted you to, I think it would be great for you to unpack that a little bit in the decision in your mind that went into doing that.
Yeah. In a little bit of what we do is we consume our own APIs when we're building sort of like the GUI based interfaces, right? So like our store administrator is all built on our core APIs. And one of the things that we discussed when we talked about this from building to MCP was, for the same reason that an external developer would think about this, is there's oftentimes a lot of components, right, that you need to organize, right? It's got to make a number of API calls, in a particular situation. It's got to do inventory checks, what have you. And so a little bit of this is, how do you start to, I don't know if automate's the right word, but like make explicit in a place other than documentation that, how these things work together, right? And so in your resources in an MCP server, you say, hey, these are the 10 steps it needs to go through, and you articulate it to teach the AI how to do it. That in some ways becomes a much more actionable, useful way to understand the APIs and how to engage with them than you would, where in the old days you have to go read the documentation site. Nobody ever does that. That's the thing.
Right? RTFM? You mean it doesn't happen?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, I can build my IKEA furniture without looking at the instructions, right? It's the same thing, right?
Right. So a lot of this you're talking about is from the developer angle, building the storefronts. Let's go up a layer than that to sort of like your merchandisers. What do you feel like it helps or harms? Do they need new skills for the business users kind of that are in this new world?
One of the things that we just released is effectively a prompt-based interface. It's called Elastic IQ inside our store administrator for starting by creating promotions, right? Because promotions, particularly in the B2C use case, but even in B2B, can sort of have like have a rules engine behind them, and they have sort of cascading level of complexity, right? And so not everybody thinks then in sort of if this, then that sort of, workflow diagrams, but they can describe what they want. And so can you use natural language rather than applying, filters and sort of, conditions and stacking rules, right? All of that can happen via the prompt interface. And so as we think about it for merchandisers is what are the tedious tasks and what are the bulk tasks that we can simplify for them through automation. And so we're starting with workflow creation. Second thing, we have our agenda is how do you do sort of catalog analysis, right? You have a large catalog. Does everything have all the pieces necessary to effectively merchandise it? Is it organized in the categories that you want from a search point of view? And then sort of bulk updates, right? Like, I need to update the price on 500 items, right? Today you got to select the items, do an export, update the thing, do an import, right? Like there's all these sort of brittle processes that we've sort of put in place, that we're very bullish that we can automate with AI, and I think the challenge for us in a product development point of view is typically those activities by the merchandiser are deterministic by design. Did you update the price? Yes or no? Right. Yeah. So delivering back a probabilistic.
Yeah. The answer can't be maybe.
Exactly. We think we got all of them. Right. So you have to sort of figure out how you apply multiple, whether it be multiple models or multiple run throughs to deliver a deterministic response to an action that's by definition probabilistic.
Yeah. I mean, it almost feels like the story is not yet fully written because doing things multiple times just doesn't seem like where we're going to end up. I mean, call me crazy, but like, why should we have to do something that we saw, like redo something that we solved in computer programming?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly interesting. I think that it's sort of it's the nature of sort of AI in general that it always delivers a probabilistic outcome. I worked at an AI company before Elastic Path, and we did a lot with computer vision, and we're like, we have 95% confidence that that's an ostrich, right?
Yeah.
So, but the ironic thing is the machine can run through. You can set up a machine process that runs through multiple times to narrow the probability to a 99.8% confidence level in milliseconds, right? So it's not perceived as doing it more than once. The other thing that's sort of really interesting around the AI world is, if you're in commerce, we've all learned that milliseconds matter and can be measured in dollars. But yet we're all, now that we use AI, we're all like, hey, seconds are okay, right?
Right. Minutes sometimes.
Exactly.
Correct. Yeah. It can't be that this is going to be the way that most, I mean, it's kind of what I'm getting to is the fact is Amazon didn't suddenly become useless just because of this protocol came out. And the fact that we can get all these things within seconds, it just means that there's sometimes we have more time than others. There's sometimes we need things slower. It kind of feels, I'm very much in the sort of yes and camp of AI, not just sort of like instead of everything that came before it. So I'm curious how you feel about some of those users waiting seconds and minutes for things.
I think it depends on the nature of of what you're looking for, right? I think the extensive moat that Amazon or Walmart has is in their logistics and fulfillment, their ability to deliver it in 30 minutes, right? If it's groceries or what have you. ChatGPT isn't going to solve that. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you're like, oh, I need it immediately. I can just, with a few clicks, I'm done. But, but if you're sort of considered purchases or you don't necessarily know what you want, I feel like the experience, the search experience on ChatGPT is a lot more enticing to me than it is just sort of looking at Amazon, right? Because all you do in Amazon is you put in like, I need a thing, and then you look for the highest ranked rated items and put the most ratings, and you're like, is that the thing I need? Right. But I still return goods to Amazon all the time. So clearly my hit rate is not great. And I think, those things are interesting. Like one I use in demos a lot is I walk my dog in the woods. We end up through a field, and I need waterproof trail running shoes. And that's what I like to wear. Right. And turns out that's a hard thing to find at a reasonable price. So like it ends up being like a good ChatGPT or Perplexity query because of the nature of things that it responds to. But like I never get anything when I just do general searches.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it seems like further out from this sort of user in the loop point of view is more agentic shopping. There are other barriers that seem to be, we're going to have to knock down between that, like, compliance, risk, trust, safety, fraud. Do you see that as just pretty far off now? Or do you think this is something that the community is actively working on and you're even thinking about a role for your own tools?
I think an identity authentication layer is going to emerge for agents, right? And like we have customers who are in the collectible space for whom, they've spent the last 5 years, managing performance at massive scale and then building bot protection, bot firewalls to keep out, thousands and tens of thousands of agents for every real person that's coming to their store, right? Because of the experience they want to deliver to their shoppers. So I think that I don't think that problem magically goes away in a world where now I got to sort of filter which 50% of them are good and 50% of them are bad actors in my definition as a business. So I think in the absence of a sort of identity layer, right? Like an MCP client and a server need to have an authentication key exchange to say, oh, we know who you are. You're authentic. You're an authorized to do a thing on our site. I think that needs to emerge in the market and probably be follow behind MCP. But once, from a credit card transaction point of view, Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, they're already well down that path. And I think that's where it has to happen, is at the payment layer. I don't think the software layer for building a storefront has a ton of value in there, right? Because like we don't do the fraud piece. Like that's what
and we've had obviously a lot of solutions in the real and virtual world, whether it's like chip and pin or 3D secure, all these things. It kind of feels like you still need to make sure from your point of view and of an identity point of view that your agent hasn't been taken over and your credentials aren't lost.
Right. And it's one thing if you're buying shirts or shoes, but it's another thing if you buy a $20,000 couch or, 30. I was talking to one of our customers that's in the automotive space. You buy a $35,000 car. Like what? You did what now? Agent?
Yeah. No, for sure. Wanted to go during our discussions. You've talked about the analogy of sort of paved and unpaved roads for AI tasks. I would love for you to unpack that because I thought it was an interesting analogy that you brought up that could help people in the audience think about their own types of problems.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, and this is a concept I took from Jeff Lawson's book about Twilio. I think it was Buy or Die was the name of it. But certainly that was a core concept. Build or Die. But we provide tools at Elastic Path for our developers and for the rest of the organization to adopt AI, right? And we put it, we've leaned into this of driving AI adoption in the company. And a big portion of that is you have no idea as an individual what's possible with AI until you start using AI, right? And you need experience, right? So unlike maybe a telephone or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, it takes it, you need sort of feedback loops with yourself. You're like, oh, I didn't know I could do this. I didn't know I could do that. But at the same time, one of the challenges as an organization is there's a lot of tools out there, right? And so, we're a Google shop. So obviously we get Gemini, ChatGPT is sort of by far the leader. So we have ChatGPT, but most of my development organizations using Claude and Cursor. And so, the way we've sort of explained to the organization on how to pick which tools to use is we've done a lot of sharing around, I use this for this task and here's why it worked and why, it was beneficial or not. And this is where I struggled with another tool. But then also said, hey, we're going to deliver paved roads, which make it easier for you as a developer, as a marketer. That you can follow those, right? And you don't have to do any of the heavy lifting, any procurement, any, training, all that's provided for you. However, if you choose to go sort of off-road and go on an unpaved road because you have a compelling reason to do so, you should get approval to do it, but we won't prevent you from doing that. And so, because we want everyone in the company thinking about innovative ways to solve problems. And I don't want us to be constrained by our tool choice, right? Because sometimes you pick bad tools and they don't deliver on their promise, if you will. And I'm locking you a contract right now. You must use this crappy tool because we bought it.
Yeah.
And that's your deal.
I would love to unpack that a little bit because sometimes these paved roads can become, the only road, which clearly you don't want to happen. How do you think about that problem for your employees?
I think it's really comes down to from our leaders. Are the processes that we have in place to do sort of our jobs that we need to accomplish, are the processes and the tools in those helping us, or in some ways are they providing putting limitations on us? Like a good example is I was at a large company, Acquia. I remember I made a list of all the tools we use that drove me bonkers. And I went to a startup and I'm like, we're not using any of those. And so like the big one was SAP Concur. Like I hate SAP Concur. So,
yeah.
And so I went to a new company and we did Expensify. Then we came here and I'm like, we're using SAP Concur. Like and so all the things that I remember I hated, I was like, I'm like, how do we shift away from this? Like, what's the compelling reason? We haven't had one. The same thing is this was an office shop. And I was like, we can't be an innovative technology company if we're still using Microsoft Office. So I got us to switch to Google Drive. And so it's this sort of constantly asking questions on, one way I think about it is, we're a modern commerce platform. And so we ask our customers to take a journey with us when they adopt our commerce platform, to think ahead, to think about future-proofing their business and adopting new ways to do that. So if we aren't able as an organization to embody the change that we ask our customers to make, then we're not authentic ourselves, right? And we're making them make decisions and changes that we're unwilling to do. And so that really has been sort of the underlying guiding principle when we're like, oh, we've always done it this way. Well, yeah, so what?
Right. I love that challenger thinking and holding yourself to a higher standard, especially ones that you're asking your own customers to embody. Speaking of organizations that might change, we're all sort of familiar with software product management and creating specs and roadmaps and all those things. We, in our previous conversation, talked about like an evolution in fidelity from something like a PowerPoint presentation, which can be very murky, what it really means and slippery to wrap your arms around, versus something like Jeff Bezos when he introduced Amazon. I mean, not to the business world, but I think he definitely standardized the idea at Amazon about the 6-pager So how can you create this incredibly dense document that then just becomes the touchstone for what we're doing here and why we're here, to force people to think through what they're doing? Ironically, AI is replacing critical thinking skills. So that even it's like a whole other sidebar we won't go to in a second. But talk to me about your PMs and how they're working now.
Yeah, no, it's very much an important part of sort of my philosophy, and it's interesting. The fidelity of a PowerPoint, which usually has 300 characters per page, versus a Word document or Google Doc, which has 3,000. So like 10x increase in fidelity. And I remember the first time we did a product review with the board here, I wrote them a 6-pager, and they're like, this is awesome, because usually we get these presentations and then we go back 2 months later, we can't remember what the talk track was, right? So now it's all explicit. It's all in there, right? And so, one of the things that we've seen in product management is wholesale adoption of tools like Replit and Lovable, and started to do prototyping. And, the best, every product management organization has a range of sort of technical skills. Like some of them are former developers that go into product management. Some of them come from professional services or elsewhere. And the moment I knew that we sort of had something here was my least technical product manager built this amazing quotation app, all in Replit. It was like, honestly, it looked like a production level quotations app for a B2B use case. And I was like, if she can do this here, this changes the game. And to my engineering leadership's credit, they loved it. They're like, that's what we want. This is so much better than a typical, as an end user, I want to be able to do a thing. Right. Like, what do I do with that? Right. There's no nuance. There's no depth to it. And so then we had to have endless discussions around, we go through sizing exercises, but when I can see it and understand it and say, hey, how'd you do this thing? Oh, this is important for these reasons, right? It's a lot more, the level of conversation in terms of understanding why and what to do is much better, right? And that's the classic discussion between an engineer or product manager. It's like, why should I do this? What proof do you have? What,
right.
justification do you have, right?
Sometimes it can get more contentious than that even.
Oh, absolutely, right? And when it gets technical, there's inevitably an information asymmetry problem where the engineers are way more technical than the product managers. And so part of having these prototypes is a way to sort of level the playing field, if you will, but certainly to improve the dialogue between them. So we couldn't be happier about that process.
You mentioned a couple of tools for business-oriented users, and I think probably at this point, a lot of people have heard of these tools, but not everyone has sort of used them actively. I would love for you to sort of compare and contrast Lovable versus Replit. Do you have a favorite? Do you think it's just sort of like Coke and Pepsi, or what's your preference? And talk to me about your team and which tools do they gravitate to for different types of people and use cases?
Sure. So like, I'll be honest, personally, I probably don't have enough experience with multiples to sort of pick one. I use Replit, right? And it's funny because I use it for work things, but I also use it for personal things, right? So like a good example of this is I'm a big golfer, and golf's a data-driven sport. And so like there's a very narrow part of my game that I'm trying to capture data on. So I built a whole app in Replit, and then I've got all of this data I'm entering in there to really, it's just doing analysis on a certain part of the game. And I love it, right? And it gets instant feedback. And a little bit of it is, you go through the process, and I'm sure this is what developers typically go through, is you go and you try a thing and it breaks, and then you got to rewind, and sort of like it's the 2 step forward, 1 step back. The pace at which that happens without having to sort of do it by hand is fascinating. But I would say that my less technical product managers are in Replit primarily. And I think, it just sort of works from a visual design point of view, and sort of they get it. My more technical product managers tend to go to Cursor and Claude. And we have a lot of people using Windsurf. And so, those are things that they're just more comfortable with those tools. I think it's a personal preference piece of it. But I do love the fact that in Replit, I'm watching the visual build out in real time, and then I can push it to Netlify or Vercel or wherever I need to with a single click.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fascinating. And because different people are using different tools and different models, and certain of those roads are more paved or unpaved than others, how do you measure how your employees are doing in like their own journey in AI towards mastery? Is that something you're tracking actively? Is it more of a personal development, corporate policy?
So we've added it into performance reviews this year, and really, I would argue this is the first year we're doing it. It's really more binary. Is there resistance and they're not willing to do it, or are they willing to try? Right? Because fundamentally, we understand that the more you try and the more you use it, the more you'll learn how to use it. It's sort of like riding a bike. And so that's the part we're trying to identify as the sort of resistors. I think going forward in the future, maybe there'll be more qualitative assessment on ability to use AI. But it's not a problem I'm really worried about today. The other things that we've created here, and I know others are doing the same, is we have an AI showcase in every one of our all hands. And we have sort of 2 or 3 people get up and show something they've built. And the big thing there is it's easy to find product developers to come in and talk to that. So it's how do we find someone outside of product development to show a thing?
Got it.
And so, by demonstrating at the all hands in our show and tell channel in the places where we communicate that this is important, we're effectively setting a sort of a cultural priority that this is a thing that, to be successful here, you need to do. And so honestly, whereas a year ago, where there's a lot more skepticism and resistance, at this point, I don't think there is. In fact, we had a developer who had just posted about he had sort of done a thing and he came back and he had to go back and rework some of it via AI. Mm-hmm. And, he's a really exceptionally talented developer, right? And so I don't know if I put him in the skeptic catalog, but he sort of has a skeptical eye. And in his assessment that he put in the show and tell channel, he's like, look, I saved 20 hours by not having to do this myself and hand coded it, but I had to spend 2 hours sort of sit and finish, polish and debugging it. Right. So that's still 18 hours of savings. And that's from someone who's looking at it with a critical eye. And so I think by sharing that, what it goes to is like, it's not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet for everything, but it is definitively a productivity enhancer.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fascinating and a good example about how you need to work with the AI's result. This is not something that's polished out of the box, that's ready to just show everyone based on whatever prompt you happen to come up with, especially with a probabilistic model, right?
Yeah. Look, do we think, we're still in such early innings. In 5 or 6 years, maybe can we write production code just at a prompt-based interface? Maybe. But, I think, I don't think that's the primary problem to solve today.
Yeah.
Today it's really about how do we improve productivity and turn a team of 10 into behaving like a team of 20.
Yeah. I would love to close on go to market a little bit. I mean, we're in a particularly noisy time, and you talked about accelerating innovation, adoption, releases, where there are so many vendors talking about AI as this table stakes story to get in the room, and buyers are looking for it. Buyers have AI budgets now that they're looking to do. What's the difference between an AI moat and just something you kind of slap on as organizations think about their innovation roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's a great question, and it's a conversation that we're having all the time. I'm not sure. I definitively know the answer. Part of me believes that your core differentiators before AI remain your core differentiators with AI. And so for us, the thing we excel at above all else is the way we manage complex product catalogs, right? If you have hundreds of thousands of SKUs or thousands of variations or need to do bundling and sort of, and sort of combinatorial pieces, we do that exceptionally well. And there's a lot that AI can do to automate that, to simplify that, to improve merchandiser capabilities of that, to, deliver that into answer engines so that way it becomes more discoverable to where the audience is searching. But at the end of the day, it's that those capabilities around our catalog are really what will differentiate us,
right?
Not what sort of AI.
It's still the engine.
Exactly. So
that's fascinating.
I think right now, and I feel it every day, is it's really hard to differentiate from a storytelling point of view with AI because exactly as you said, everyone's telling that story. And so all of us are telling that story as vendors to tap into the AI budgets, which we know are available. That's where spending is happening. So it's necessary, but not sufficient to differentiate yourself from the market.
Yeah. I mean, this has been a great conversation, Bryan. I really appreciate it. I've definitely taken away a lot of tips and tricks, which is really my goal for every episode. And hopefully folks in the audience come out of it talking about like paving the road for your teams, helping accelerate adoption, thinking through in detail your user cases with higher fidelity prototypes and specs. If you're in the audience out there and you're wrestling with the same questions and you have a story to tell from your SaaS company or wanting help paving roads, send me a message. We'd love to share your story here on OShift. Bryan House, CEO at Elastic Path. Thank you for going deep with us today. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, Rick, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.